Hi.
I'm Ashley. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
You too. Okay. So the first question, actually, what is your pronoun?
Pardon?
What's your pronoun?
What's that? Oh, of course. It's a she, her.
Okay. So, the first question is, how did you meet Ed Roberts?
Well, a friend of mine asked me to go over to this new nonprofit and help them write a proposal to a San Francisco foundation. It was their first proposal. And I had been working for maybe about 10 years in fundraising and public relations, and had recently left my job to work on my novel, which wasn't going anywhere. And so I did go over, and I had never heard of the Center for Independent Living. And frankly, I had never met someone with a severe disability. And so I walked in, and I went up this old elevator to, I think, the third floor, and it was a very, very old building in Berkeley, and into this room, and there were like 3 or 4 young men sitting around in wheelchairs and with various disabilities. And I met Ed, and I was fascinated by watching Ed and listening to him talk and hearing about what he was trying to do with the Center for Independent Living. And I had been working for nonprofits, and mostly in the arts and in healthcare. But I was very attracted by Ed's idea about disabled people having a right to determine their own lives, to make their own decisions, and to design the programs that serve them. And I was quite excited about it. And he was charming, and we talked about what the CIO had done. This was 1973. CIO had started, I think, in 72, and or maybe incorporated 71. But and I thought, this is a great idea. This could really work, and I can help, because it was the kind of thing that I like to write about. So he handed me a pile of personal stories by several of the people that were involved with the early CIO, and said, this is things that we tried to write ourselves, but we haven't been able to get it together into a good proposal for the San Francisco Foundation. So I took it all home and read it, and I worked on the proposal and brought it back to him, and he liked it, and he submitted it. And then he said, and Ed was the executive director of CIO, and he said, well, I got other little jobs that you could do for us if you would. I would like to have a brochure with the brochure. And I said, well, I can do that too. I said, it would be good if you could pay me a little bit. And so then he started to, he often paid me a little bit per hour for a couple of hours. And so I started to work with him, and I continued to work with him for the next 20 years or more. And I did a lot of brochures and other things, and mostly foundation proposals, so mostly government proposals. And I worked with Ed mostly on program development. So it was very interesting to go to CIL, because I was confronted by a number of people who asked me why I was there. And I was surprised. And they said, well, you're a walkie. What are you doing here? You could be anywhere. And I didn't feel that way. I felt as though I was in a place where I was comfortable, where I felt I belonged. And that was when I first got to realize that, of course, I have hidden disabilities, and I've been around disability. I just been never aware of it. That was my introduction.
Okay. So, what role did Ed play in your life, and how did he influence you?
Well, he had a profound influence on me. He was a very positive person, and he thought everything was achievable if you went about it right. If a little bit of luck, if you, in some way, it was achievable. And I really bought into that. I think I learned it, and it has shaped my career and my personal life ever since. I am constantly. I think I learned from Ed how to think out of the box, and and that and to see the value of it, and how it contributes to a better outcome.
Mm.
So rather than just follow the tradition what it's always done.
All right. So the third question is, describe your impressions of Ed, and what was his personality like?
Well, he was endlessly cheerful, and he was um, positive, and he had a sense of humor. Um, all of these things are pretty interesting as someone with as little mobility as Ed, and this little, and he also um, he had no qualms in going up to people and introducing himself and saying hello. He wasn't self-conscious, which is quite a contradiction when you think of our society and how it has so much to do with how you look, and how you present yourself. And there's Ed. He didn't look like the change agent, the policymaker, the thinker that he was. But he expressed it, and he also didn't take slights. He didn't respond. Over the years, I saw a lot of people compete with him within the movement, and I saw people try to, as he would warn me, he'd say, "We'll go see these people, but they're going to talk to you rather than to me, and I want them to talk to me." And so, I got used to that. They ask you, "What does he want to eat?" or something, rather than just ask him directly.
Mm.
And that's what I learned that from him too. But it was a lot about his self-possession and his feeling about himself, his good feeling about himself.
Okay. And then for question 4, what wisdom did Ed pass on to you?
Um, uh, um, I think that I could do anything I wanted to do.
Okay.
I think, yeah, everything is possible.
And then 5 is, what was Ed's legacy, and leave more broadly?
He became, he enjoyed visibility. So he welcomed journalists, he welcomed photographers, and he liked to meet people. And before he died, he became one of the most well-known person with a disability in the world, as far as I can tell. And everybody knew the famous Ed Roberts, and they all had these anecdotes that traveled around about what Ed did and said, so I think his legacy was that he was communicating that we can be in control of our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the most important message. But the fact that he also went everywhere and talked to everyone made it something that communicated very widely.
Okay. 6 is, what was Ed like as a young activist?
Okay. I only met him when he and I were the same age. I met him when I was in my early 30s, and so was he, and I guess maybe 32. So I don't really know personally of period
Mhm.
before that. I know his mother very well, and I know that he was very shy for years, and thought that people would laugh at him. So I think that he actually had to learn. I remember him telling me that that when he went back to school after he was polio, he was afraid that people would stare at him, and that he decided that it really bothered him. But then he decided that, well, if they're going to continue to stare at me, I'm going to act as though I'm a star. And I think that's part of the transformation that occurred as he grew up and became a charismatic leader.
8 is, when was the moment that you realized he was a game changer?
Well, I guess it was the first time I went with him to see a foundation executive, which was shortly after I had written the book. By the way, they were awarded that first proposal from the San Francisco Foundation. So then I became eager to do other proposals. And I had been working in San Francisco, so I knew some local foundations. And he also had been on the verge of approaching a number of foundations. So I went with him to see the director of Levi Strauss, and the director of Levi's, and because they had offered the CIL a van, and Ed and I went in, and Ed started, the guy was talking mostly to me, and we were now explaining about CIL, and Ed was talking, and then I noticed that Ed was moving the foot pedals, not foot pedals, the foot stand of his wheelchair up and down and up and down, and then he would move the back of the chair, and he'd fiddle with the controls of his electric wheelchair, and the guy was staring at, I can't remember his name, but I can find out his name. He was staring at Ed while he was doing that. And I realized that Ed was capturing his attention with his equipment. And then Ed started to talk. And of course, he had the ventilator and was talking. And the person was fascinating. I could just see Ed took over, captured the man's attention and caught it and kept it, And I could see that the guy was listening and responding to him. And I could, that in my mind, and that's what Ed did all the time with these meetings. And that's when I realized he was a game changer, because he had a way of making an introduction that was unforgettable. And once he got in, he could make his cause, he could state his cause, and it was undeniably, a good cause. So that's the answer to that.
The next question is, give 3 words that describes Ed.
Well, I would call him a leader and an advocate and a lover. He really loved people, and he would make us all feel. I felt special, and I know many, many other people felt special to me.
The next one is, what is the funny story or memory that you have of Ed?
Well, one that I do remember fondly is I went to Washington with him when he was interviewed to be Assistant Secretary of the Health and Education and Welfare Department. and I think it was under the Carter administration, and it was in the dead of winter, and Ed and I went along because I did a lot of I accompanied him on a lot of his meetings with people, prominent people, or people who might give money, something like that. That was part of my role. And we got to Washington, and it was snowing heavily. And he has been this big electric chair, and the attendant dropped us. They dropped us off at the hotel, and we went in, and we wound up going down to dinner in the hotel. And then we went outside, and it was snow all around it, and Ed was sliding around on the pavement in the snow, and we were just laughing and playing in the snow. And who would have thought that I'd be doing that with him?
Mm-hmm.
And it was with the chair. And that's a very small incident, but it's one that I've never forgotten. And he was sliding. I could particularly remember right by the hotel there was a garage. There was an entry to the garage, and it was down the slope. And he would slide down the slope, and I thought, oh my God, what's going on? And then he'd come back up. There was another incident was when we went to the press club. I was speaking at the press club in Washington, D.C. And we were coming out, and some guy came up to me, and I were walking down the street, and he was obviously a little drunk, and he started to accost me. And Ed got his chair in there between this guy and me, and he started to move his foot pedal, and he said, I want you to know that I take karate, and you'll be in great trouble if you bother this young woman. And the guy left. And I thought that was hilarious. And Ed was taking karate, but I don't know how much he learned. But he said he learned he could flip somebody if necessary with his chair. Those are the stories that I cherish.
Why did he chose to become an advocate?
It was either do that or retire to the life in a nursing home or in his iron box. He told me that when he started UC Berkeley, the dean of the school of public policy said to him, I know what's going to happen with you. You're going to get a PhD, and then you're going to go back home. And that'll be it. And Ed said, no, never. I've got a lot of work to do. And he was constantly telling the rest of us that we'll have, there are always setbacks. In the independent living movement, we had setbacks, but we had to get right back up and keep working on it because no one else is going to do it for us.
Okay. How did he find or create his support system within the disability community?
He would ask for help. And he would, like when I was working with him, he would ask me if I would move his arm or something, because he couldn't do it himself. That kind of thing. But also, he was a great one for meeting other disabled people in Berkeley, and Berkeley was full of young people with disabilities. And he would talk to them. He would invite them to his home with his mom, and she would for dinner or to meet other people, and he would tell them about CIL, and they would invariably say, "Oh, that's wonderful. We need something like that in my hometown or something." And then he'd say, "Well, we go and do it. You're the only one that can do it because no one else is there." And they would, and they thanked him for that.
Okay. What should youth be advocating for to carry on Ed's legacy?
Um, uh, well, well, I think I think one reason is because Ed's life and experience is a can-do story, and it can be inspirational. But the other reason is that um, everyone needs to feel that they have limitless possibilities, and that they can achieve things that other people may not have thought they could achieve because of their disability. And that was his big message.
Okay. And then the last one is, what would Ed's dream for the disability community for today?
Well, actually, I don't know if you know that Ed and I and Judy Human started the World Institute on Disability. But, you know, when Ed died, I called the other organizations in the Bay Area together with the city of Berkeley to talk about a memorial for Ed. And I suggested that what Ed wanted more than anything else was for everyone to be able to work together, to get along. And I thought that there was nothing that they couldn't accomplish if they could cooperate. And then we talked about how the one thing that all the disability organizations in the Bay Area lacked was a home of their own, and we discussed it for a while, and everybody was interested, and we came up with the idea of the Ed Roberts campus, and we were able to build that. And I became the development director for the Ed Roberts campus. It took us about 15 years, but we raised $60 million for the campus. And that, to me, that's an example of Ed's dream. It's to have these groups form all over the country.
Then back to that one question, can you share a story or anecdote about Ed that gives us an idea of who he was?
Well, sure. There's one that still amazes me. Is Ed was hot to try out most anything that other people would, other creative other opportunity to have fun. Mm-hmm. So one was through a friend. We were working for the state at the time, and we met the people from etc. And etc. was an organization that was doing river rafting in wild waters in California. And Ed was saying things that I wish I could do that, and there was no way it was like he in his chair. I mean, but finally he wanted to do it, and so they started to work to see what they could do, and they came up with this crazy idea of putting Ed in on the raft with his respirator, and his wife Kathy was there with him, and they started off and they went down the river, and it was ridiculous. I mean, I wasn't in the raft. I went along with them, but I didn't get on that raft. It seemed outrageous. I was afraid that he was going to drown or something, because of his breathing difficulties. And but they were going up and down the rapids, and he had a wonderful time. Everybody was a little freaked out that it was as rough as it was, but everybody was delighted, and that was just an example of Ed, what he did.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
I just want to know if you know what changed in him between being that quiet, reserved, young man to being a more outspoken, like being more vocal and being more like a leader.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess, so you want to know what led him to, how he got to become more outspoken?
Yeah.
Um, uh, I think he reacted to the way people responded to him. I think that he was surprised at first at how successful he was, and then he began to enjoy it more, and he really he developed a persona of a star. He cultivated it. I'm sure he didn't have it as a child. As I said to Ashley, he was self-conscious that people were staring at him.
Yeah.
But I think he was surprised and pleased at how extraordinary, when he went to Cal, how extraordinary it was to have him in Berkeley and wander around. And the university said that he was eligible to matriculate, to be a student, but they couldn't take him because they had no place for him to live. So someone suggested he go over to the university hospital, which he did. And the doctor said, you can put your iron lung in my hospital and you can stay there. And then Ed suddenly became very visible on campus. So I think it was in response to his visibility. And he really felt invincible. It's really interesting, Evan. People didn't embarrass him or shame him. Ed had never seemed to get enough oxygen, but we decided over the years. But so he often fell asleep. He fell asleep during meetings. So when he was a state director, I was assistant state director, we would go to these meetings and he'd fall asleep while he was talking, and I'd nudge him, and everyone would wait, and then he woke up, and it just didn't faze him. He just would get right back on and start talking again. He just became, that's how strong he became.
Was he know where you guys were at in the conversation, even if you fell asleep? Like, he kind of knew where it was. So, did he know? Like, was able to wake up and join the conversation, rejoin the conversation, and kind of.
Yes, because he also he had a message. He had a message, and his message was disabled people have have to take responsibility for themselves and need to be the ones that design the services and tell you what they want.
Yeah. So obviously, thank you for your time, June.
Yeah.
You're welcome.